मैं गुजारिश करूंगा आज के हमारे मुख्य अतिथि मुख्य न्यायाधीश आदरणीय जस्टिस टी.एस. ठाकुर साहब से कि वो अपनी स्पीच डिलीवर करें। माननीय श्री ठाकुर साहब।
Very esteemed and veteran journalist Shri Kuldeep Nair ji, Shri Deepak Malviya sahab, Shri Rajkumar ji, very distinguished audience, ladies and gentlemen. It is a matter of great privilege for me to have been invited to deliver this 37th memorial lecture in the memory of a person who touched so many lives when he was alive and active, and who has left behind an indelible mark on the society and on the sands of time. I had heard of Shri Bhimsen Sachar as one of the leading political lights of his time. But when Chief Justice Rajinder Sachar invited me to deliver this lecture, I read a little more, and I realized that the kind of achievements this man had to his credit was simply amazing. To do so many things in one life is what I think distinguishes him from the rest of his contemporaries. A lawyer practicing at Gujranwala, a freedom fighter being booked for non-cooperation movement and other events regarding freedom struggle, getting elected to the assembly unopposed, being a chief minister not once but twice, being a member of the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan, and then eventually you see leading a life of complete dedication to the society, even at the ripe old age of 84 or so, is something which only people of his mettle and his generation could do. These days it is so difficult to make two ends meet. The joint families are breaking up, nuclear families are, you see, getting replaced in place of the old system. Shelter, food and a job itself has become a challenge for such a large section of our society. But in times which were not so easy and not so pleasant because the country was enslaved, there was a freedom struggle going on, and people were wanted to somehow throw away the yoke of slavery. To be born in those times may have been both good and bad, because you came in contact with the best of leaders, people who were completely dedicated to the cause of independence. But you had also the worst of times, because India was, after all, a country subjugated by outsiders. And to get involved in freedom struggle in those times was not because they were looking for any aggrandizement or any office or any monetary or other benefit, but because of idealism that fired in them. I am very happy to note that the society of which he was a trustee continues even after so many years, and people committed to that idealism still are around. Mr. Rajkumar, Mr. Malviya, and a host of others who are with them. I believe there are a very large number of branches that are functioning all over the country. There are still some vestiges of such selfless service to the society, which is a matter of great satisfaction in modern times. I would say that it gives me a great pleasure to be here, to pay homage to that great soul, and to pay my tributes for all that he has done during his lifetime. Having said that, the subject given to me today to speak about is independent judiciary, bastion of democracy. When I accepted the invitation to come and speak, I told my Supreme Court Research Center to prepare a little draft of a lecture, because conventionally a memorial lecture is a written lecture. And yesterday I got a draft, which usually I correct to add my own ideas. But when I gave it to my law clerk, Mr. Parshuram, to see whether there are any mistakes in it, he came back with a shocking news that this draft is nothing but a plagiarized version of an article which Professor M.P. Singh has written about the independence of judiciary in this country. So, the person who prepared the draft happens to be a judicial officer who is working in the Supreme Court Research Center. That gave me an insight into how the judges usually work. You pick up some paragraphs from here, pick up some paragraphs from there, add a few lines, and the judgment is ready. That is precisely what this officer did when I read the draft. The net effect is that I do not have a written speech today, of whatever it may mean, but having committed to come and speak to you on a subject which is, you see, so well known and so mundane, I would share my thoughts with you, and if I fumble for ideas and words, please forgive me. When we talk of democracy, the subject is independent judiciary, bastion of democracy. When we talk of democracy and do not talk about an independent judiciary in that democracy, it would be like talking about the solar system without the sun. You can perhaps talk about the solar system without the sun, but in a constitutional democracy like India, you cannot possibly talk about democracy without an independent judiciary. That is the kind of relationship between democracy and judiciary, an independent judiciary. And that marks the importance of the role that judiciary plays in a democratic setup. But after all, if you look at the judiciary as an institution, what do you see? You see judges. Judiciary comprises judges. And what is said about judges and what ought to be the mettle of those judges, I will only point out from a few observations from outstanding people. Palkiwala says about H.R. Khanna. After all, the judiciary is known by the judges who have been a part of that system. And I quote, he says, "God give us men. A time like these demands strong minds, great hearts, true faith, and ready hands. Men whom the lust of office does not kill, men whom the spoils of office cannot buy, men who possess opinions and a will, men who have honor, men who will not lie, men who can stand before a demagogue and damn his treacherous flatteries without winking, tall men, sun-crowned, who live above the fog in public duty and in private thinking. The judiciary ought to have men like him. Cardozo talks about judicial process. In judiciary, you deal with or you handle judicial process. What does he say? Deep below consciousness are other forces, the likes and dislikes, the predilections and prejudices, the complex of instincts and emotions and habits and conviction which make man, whether he be litigant or judge. There has been a certain lack of candor in much of the discussion of the theme, or rather perhaps in the refusal to discuss it, as if judges must lose respect and confidence by the reminder that they are subject to human limitations. All told, judiciary works because judges work in that institution, and judges have human limitations. Lord Denning says the bar assesses each one of the judges, but their assessment is fickle to a degree. If a judge decides in their favor, he is a good judge. If against, then he is a bad judge. Charles Hosky on ideal judges says, what is indeed which makes a judge? In the ultimate sense, the greatest of judges are those in whom is placed the greatest confidence as judges. And this confidence goes to the judge who inspires his brethren on the bench, at the bar, and among the public whom he serves. The conviction that the decision of every question, the weighing of every argument, the resolution of every discretionary issue will be made selflessly, fearlessly, wisely insofar as wisdom is given to him and to the best of the understanding of law which binds him as well as the litigants. Cardozo again says the judge, even when he is free, is still not wholly free. He is not to innovate at pleasure. He is not a knight errant roaming at will in pursuit of his own ideal of beauty or of goodness. He is to draw his inspiration from consecrated principles. He is not to yield to spasmodic sentiment, to vague and unregulated benevolence. He is to exercise a discretion informed by tradition, methodized by analogy, disciplined by system, and subordinated to the primordial necessity of order in social life. And Justice P.N. Bhagwati, in S.P. Gupta's case, said, the concept of independence of judiciary is not limited only to independence from executive pressure or influence, but is much wider concept which takes within its sweep independence from many other pressures and prejudices. It has many dimensions, namely fearlessness of the power centers, economic or political, and freedom from prejudices acquired and nourished by the class to which the judge belongs. This is among many others who have similarly spoken about how judges ought to conduct or how they ought to practice this trait of judgeship, only signifies that the job of a judge is neither free from criticism nor is he divine in the sense that he doesn't have any limitations, pride or prejudice. Having said that, may I briefly point out what are the basic notions of independence of judiciary. The notion of independence of judiciary in particular must, number one, signify that judiciary enjoys institutional independence, in that it must be independent of the other branches of government, namely the executive and the parliament. If you talk of an independent judiciary, you cannot possibly have a judiciary which will depend on the executive for discharge of its functions. Two, the judiciary must be independent as to internal matters of judicial administration, including the assignment of cases to judges within the court to which they belong. Who should hear what case should not be decided by anybody except the judiciary. You cannot say the executive will choose its judges for its cause. Where should a matter be listed, or what should be the combination of the judges to decide the matter will be a very essential feature of independence of judiciary, because the judiciary must have complete freedom in deciding as to who the judges would be that would decide the case. Judiciary must have independence in financial matters and have sufficient funds to perform their functions efficiently. Judiciary must be independent as to decision making. Both the government and other institutions have the duty to respect and observe the decisions handed down by the judiciary. Article 144 itself says that all authorities within the country must act in aid of the judiciary. And therefore, if that has to prevail, there is no option for statutory and non-statutory authorities except to fall in line. The judiciary must have jurisdictional competence, which means that there must be judicial autonomy in the determination of question of competence. Whether or not a court is competent to decide a matter must be left to the court itself. It cannot be decided by an outsider. This is an essential part of judicial independence. The judiciary has both the right and the duty to ensure fair court proceedings and issue reasoned decisions. Individual judges must enjoy independence in the performance of their professional duties. Individual judges have a right and a duty to decide cases before them according to law, free from outside interference, including the threat of reprisals and personal criticism. Individual judges must be appointed or elected exclusively on the basis of their professional qualifications and personal integrity. Individual judges must enjoy long-term security of tenure. If a judge were to be told that tomorrow the executive can bundle you out of the court, it will seriously impinge upon the independence of judiciary. So security of tenure is something which is very, very essential. And individual judges must be adequately remunerated. I'll read to you a passage from Australian Law Report where the ability of the executive to control the remunerations payable to judges is also seen as a possible way by which the judiciary can be subjugated or affected in terms of its ability to perform its functions. The promotion of individual judges must be based on objective factors. And the question of accountability of individual judges for unethical professional behavior must be dealt with by a fully independent and impartial organ ensuring due process of law. If proceedings against judges were to be taken by politicians or by bureaucracy, that will also seriously impinge upon the independence of judiciary. Now, why is it necessary to have an independent judiciary? You all know this, these are elementary, but may I just enumerate 3 or 4 major reasons why it is so critical for democracy, and for the judiciary also, for the discharge of its functions, that it should be independent. The first, judiciary is the guardian of the rights of the people. The Constitution guarantees certain rights. Part 3 of the Constitution guarantees fundamental rights. Now those rights are meaningless unless there is an institution free from the executive which can protect and enforce those rights. If you want the constitutional system, the constitutional mechanism, the constitutional democracy to function and to be of any meaning, you must give to the judiciary the power to enforce what is a constitutional right. Leave aside a fundamental right, even a constitutional right must be enforceable. So, one of the reasons, and perhaps one of the primary reasons why you should have an independent judiciary is that unless you have an independent judiciary, the rights that the Constitution confers upon us will be of no meaning, because you will not have a mechanism by which you can enforce those rights. And if those rights could be abrogated, suspended, taken away by an executive fiat, then it's as good as there being no right at all. It is only for that reason that judiciary's existence and its independence both assume importance. Judiciary is the sentinel on the qui vive, a guard who is always on the lookout. Sentinel on the qui vive is a guard who is always on the lookout, एक चौकीदार की तरह, keeps his eyes open. The judiciary is like a sentinel or a चौकीदार among us, कि किसी शहरी का कोई हक तो नहीं पायमाल हो रहा. That is the role that judiciary plays against a tyrannical regime. If there is, should there be any tyrannical regime, and this country has seen many ups and downs. You see, over the past 60, 70 years, you have seen the judgments are full of reports, law reports are full of situations in which the executive has gone far beyond its legitimate sphere and done things that may border on tyranny. So if you have to protect the rights of the citizens against tyrannical regimes, you need a judiciary. The entire chapter on fundamental rights would be rendered meaningless without an independent judiciary. Rights of the citizens can be protected only by an independent judiciary. Legislative boundaries of a legislature are guarded by the judiciary. The principle of independence of judges was not invented for the personal benefit of judges themselves, but was created to protect human beings against abuses of power. If you look at it, if you go back, let us say 100 years back, the king was the fountain source of all executive, legislative and judicial powers. He could make the law, he could enforce the law, and he could even deliver a judgment. He could convict and sentence anybody to death, should he be committing a capital offense. But this power, with the civilization taking, you see, roots, with the democratic culture, you see, settling down in societies which were, you see, earlier ruled by, you see, princes and nawabs and sultans, the concept of division of power also came in. The Constitution provides for separation of powers. That is one of the major chapters in the Constitution. Major dimensions of our Constitution is that you separate powers. Executive has its own powers, the legislature has its own powers, and the judiciary has its own powers. Now, the judiciary's role to prevent abuse of the power by the other organ is what is important. If the executive does something which amounts to abuse of the power vested in the executive, where will you go? You can only go to a court. And therefore, the court's independence is what will be your security. If the court is not independent, there is no security against the abuse of such power.